Welcome to Château du Lude, one of the last great chateaux of the Loire, which is still private, family-run and inhabited. It's a real journey through time that I'm proposing to you as you visit the beautiful rooms of this chateau, the places that are perhaps a little more secret, and also everything that surrounds it, like these magnificent facades and gardens overlooking a superb valley, the Loire Valley. The Loire River is a small tributary of La Loire River. Here we are in the vestibule. So the vestibule dates back to the Renaissance in the 16th century. It was obviously transformed in the 18th century, and then we tried to restore its original character in the 19th century using the stones that were still visible. But we've tried to restore it to the full style of a coffered ceiling, and we've replaced paintings set into the walls, which are paintings representing martyrs. And all the decoration you see on the columns, pilasters and door frames is reminiscent of the Renaissance and all that style. But all this was redone in the 19th century. It's completely inspired by the Italian Renaissance facade, which is totally original. So everything fits together. There's a certain homogeneity despite the centuries separating the exterior and interior decoration. What's also quite remarkable is the pavement, a marble mosaic pavement designed by architect Louis Perron. And it's a design that could be very contemporary. And there's another very similar one in a beautiful chateau on the other side of France, the Chateau d'Ancy-le-Franc, where the same architect Louis Perron also worked for. So in this vestibule, when a visitor or a family guest arrived, the first thing that struck him was probably this angel here placed at the base of the staircase. And I think that all the decoration and construction of these towers and staircase was designed around the angel, a 15th century bronze angel used as an ornament at the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. This is the last copy of a monumental bronze angel in the French sculpture. I have to tell you right away that this one is a facsimile because the great-grandparents sold the original angel to a collector. This was at the beginning of the 20th century, when they had to restore all the roofs on the chateau. The original is now at the Frick Collection in New York. But as you can see, this copy here is a very excellent facsimile in bronze. And the angel greets you with the cross, finger pointing you, and you feel that everything is converging on him. And I think it was intended by the Marquis de Talouet-Roy, who commissioned all this work in the mid-19th century. The tower we're now going to visit was built in 1840, and the angel leads us up this monumental staircase into the rooms of daily life that we will see later. He also introduces us to the Grande Bibliothèque, which in the 19th century was originally the office of the Marquis de Talouet-Roy. And so we realize clearly here that in this paneled room we can really feel that there's a studious atmosphere or a working atmosphere. There is something special in that room. It's undeniable. And this is where the Marquis liked to hang out when he had time. It was one of his favorite rooms. His office has been moved because today we're turning it into a showroom. But his office was here originally. And it was here because it allowed him to receive his guests or his appointments quickly. And so it was he who put together this library at the back, where he assembled two collections of books. One collection came from the de Talouet family, and the other from the de la Tour d'Auvergne family, the Dukes of Bouillon. So part of the library came here by inheritance. It came about through a rather astonishing and somewhat romantic figure, the Count Antoine Roy, whose bust is enthroned in the middle of the room. We see him here in the costume of the Father of France and with the Order of the Holy Cross. Antoine Roy was a lawyer. He handled the affairs of the last Duc de Bouillon. He did a lot of bidding and has finally ended up with the inheritance of the last Dukes of Bouillon. Unfortunately, the dukes died without having descendants, and so this character had a whirlwind life through the Revolution and the Restoration. He was Minister of Finance under Charles X. He was Minister of Finance to Louis XVIII. He was ennobled by Charles X, and his daughter married the Marquis de Talouet, owner of the Château du Lude. And so that's how some of the books arrived in this magnificent library, built entirely in 1850. And it's here that we also keep a few models of the gardens I'd like to show you later. These are the gardens surrounding the chateau. But let's move on. We're going to look at a few other ceremonial rooms, because once you'd arrived in the vestibule, you'd either be received in the Marquis's office or you'd be invited to a reception, and then you'd go through all the ceremonial rooms. So here you can see the magnificence of this lifestyle. First of all, during the Renaissance, you need to know that the family who occupied it at the time was the de Daillon family, a family from Poitou who were military nobility and held high positions in the king's army. From Louis XI to Louis XIV, that's around 250 years. And the Daillons settled in Château du Lude at the end of the 100 Years' War, when Anjou became part of the Kingdom of France. And they spent their time embellishing the place, trying to move away from the massiveness of a fortress to give it the cachet of a kind of pleasure palace. And that's why we're dealing with an extremely rich decoration, both inside and out. Here, for example, we're in the Grand Gallery, which we also call the party room, because it lends itself to large-scale receptions. The decor and all the furniture are absolutely beautiful and extraordinary. Let's start with the door. Just look at this door and its details. It's incredible. There's the Daillons monogram. The ermine symbol reminds us that the de Talouet family living here during the 19th century is from Brittany. Incredible. But take a look at the details of the doors. Everything is a carefully thought out decoration. This is really an exceptional decor. So there's a large part dates back to the 19th century, to the Talouets era. Why? Because when they started renovating, they're going to find painted ceilings that date back to the 16th century, and they're going to realize that there's an extremely rich and refined decor, and that's going to force them to oblige them in a way to reconstitute a decor in the style of that period. This was done a lot in the mid-19th century and in the era of Viollet-le-Duc and Dubon. At that period, this style really came to the fore, and they couldn't do otherwise and said to themselves, we're going to create a complete decor, including furniture, wall paintings, woodwork, and fireplaces. The mantle is a neo-Renaissance mantle, totally inspired by the mantles in the Chateau de Blois, but those in the Chateau de Blois are also from the 19th century. So there's really a whole era where we're plunged back into the Renaissance. I'm going to close the door, and you'll see that on the other side it's even more impressive. So here in this place, everywhere you look, it's all gilding. It's all about colors. And yet I would say that this is a room that receives very little direct sunlight, but this gilding gives it an absolutely extraordinary brightness. On top of that, it's full of architectural tricks too, so that you don't realize that you're inside the old walls of a fortress and that you're gradually entering the highly refined world of neoclassicism. So let me take you into what could be another chateau. We're in a much brighter space, much brighter, more uniform. The gilding is more discreet, although the woodwork is still elaborate. and we're here in the neoclassical wing. We can find here a succession of salons, which were really reception rooms. This wing was used almost exclusively for receptions. Here we have a succession of 3 salons, all of which are still furnished with all the furniture belonging to the family, giving them an extremely lively feel, and all the more so as the walls are adorned with beautiful family portraits, most of which are talouettes. First of all, there are the 19th century family portraits, which is the family who accompany us today. We then move from the billiard room to the Grand Salon, the centerpiece of the chateau. This wing was built just before the French Revolution, so we are around 1785. The owner, Madame de la Vieuville, was also from Brittany and inherited the chateau from her uncle Monsieur Duvillard, Joseph Julien Duvillard, who was a fan of the Compagnie des Indes. And so this gentleman returned to France after spending 10 years in Canton in China. Then after 10 years, he came back to France with his Chinese wife. We can admit that was already quite an astonishing fact for that period. And he is the one who will actually start demolition work. First, because part of the castle was very damaged. After him, his niece, who inherited the chateau, commissioned Vincent Barré, an excellent architect to whom we also owe the Château de Montgeoffroy and the Château du Marais near Paris, to build this large neoclassical wing. Basically, the work was going to be completed, at least as far as this wing was concerned, just at the time of the Revolution, in fact, in 1790, when everything came to a halt. And the building work wasn't to resume until 23 years later, when we completed the decoration of this grand salon, inspired by the decoration of Bordeaux's town hall, but all in the Louis XVI style. And then later, work continued on the beautiful tower we call the Chambord Tower, the neo-Renaissance tower housing the Ange du Lude. So from the time of Monsieur Barré, who worked for Madame de la Vieuville, we have this grand salon with the cutouts and the mirrors that reflect and give great depth to the room. And so it's a room of great elegance, and this is where all the family gatherings used to take place. This still happens to us a few times, mostly in summer, because the living room is very poorly heated in winter. But as you can see, everything is here, and everything's alive, just as it was back then. And you get the impression that the great-grandmother, whose portrait you see over there, the great-grandmother, the Marquise de Talouet-Roy, has just left the room after having spent some time with her friends. So I would say that even if this room is maybe very large, it has a certain intimacy, I think, because of the quantity of plants. And this large salon leads us to what we call the Petit Salon, which is the summer salon, I'd say, and which we occupy more in the summer periods, and where we'll continue to find the family portraits, then with some older ones dating from the Daillons period. So here we have 3 families intermingling. We have the families, Daillons, the Talouettes, and Nicolaÿ families, because the last Marquis de Talouet, who lived here, who lived in this chateau, only had 2 daughters. And so his eldest daughter, whose beautiful pastel portrait we have over there, married the Marquis de Nicolaÿ. And so that's why the chateau passed to the Nicolaÿ family, my husband's family. So after all that, we've now reached the 2nd generation, the 3rd one actually if you count our children, and also the 4th if you count our grandchildren. And through this little salon, we enter the bedroom. This is the Highness's bedroom, and it is located on the ground floor, which is one of the chateau's finest rooms. It's in the Louis XVI style, with a beautiful polish canopy. Why polish? Because it was a fashion that arrived with Marie Leczenska, who was the wife of King Louis XV. And this room is still equipped with its old toilet. So it looks as if it hasn't moved in 80 years, but in fact it's still occupied. We have guests from time to time because it's possible to rent rooms at the chateau. So we do rent this room. I'd say not too regularly, because all these rooms are very old and all the furniture is antique, so it's not for frequent use. But we do occasionally have guests at the chateau. So the Highness's room, which used to be the lady of the house's bedroom, is adjacent to probably the prettiest room in the castle, which is also the smallest. Here we enter a place, a very intimate place. Closed, very small, probably barely 8 square meters. But this room is entirely covered in paint from floor to ceiling. And we called it the studiolo at that time, and also nowadays. It was an Italian fashion. It's the kind of room you're going to find a lot in palaces, in big old Italian villas. And it's a place where the lady of the house could come to retire alone and separate herself from the courtiers to meditate in complete tranquility. This is typically what we see here at Le Lude, with a series of Renaissance paintings dating from the 16th century. They represent scenes from the Bible and also from a book written by François Petrarch called The Triumphs, which was in Monsieur de Daillon's library. And so all these murals with such an extraordinary ceiling, you'll find exactly the same motifs in the Vatican halls. The ceiling is by the school of Raphael. And I'd say that, surprisingly, this room has been completely hidden between the 18th and 19th centuries. A false ceiling was put in, the walls were painted with plaster, and that was that. And so it was, once again, the Marquis de Talouet-Roy, around 1850, who, while carrying out restoration work, came across these paintings. And it's extraordinary because they're in perfect condition. And so they're going to raise everything up again, find this ceiling underneath the false plaster ceiling. And this also prompted them to redo the decor of Le Lude in the style of the period. It was really the discovery of this studiolo that completely influenced them. Otherwise, I think we'd have gone for neo-Gothic. But here, the discovery of the studiolo led them to neo-Renaissance. But it's an absolutely remarkable piece. After this series of salons, I'm going to give you a small glimpse of our private apartments, which are nevertheless open to visitors on request. You can always take a guided tour of them if you ask in advance or at reception, because it's part of the continuity of this chateau. So here we are entering the small library. It's completely in the Renaissance style. Like we saw on the other side in the village hall, with painted ceilings, monumental fireplaces, tapestries, dark woodwork, that golden color we're going to see everywhere. Then there's the dining room. This is a room which we still use every day. I think the best way to preserve rooms and to preserve the furniture is to use them. It's to live in them every day, because we see every day if there's a problem or some needs. And because these are heated areas, we take care of them. It's really something mandatory, I think. So, of course, it's only a short step from the dining room to the kitchen. And so here I am taking you into the basements. Because obviously, as it should be, the kitchens in the past were in the basements. As a matter of fact, let me show you. Something interesting, as you can see, there's still the old mechanism for the freight elevator, which was manual, but which allowed them to bring the dishes from the kitchens to the anteroom of the dining room so that they could be served hot at the table. So here we go down into the tower's basement, and we're going to access the former kitchens, which at the time were fitting the entire tunnel. You have to remember that at the beginning of the 20th century, before the First World War, there were still 36 people working in this chateau, occupying the space between the floors, the linen rooms, and the kitchen. So here we can say that we go back in time, because we are almost back to the Middle Ages. The extraordinary vaulted ceilings of this kitchen, which we've restored, and which we're still using, though, because we're making jam on the big ovens once a month in season. So from June to November, for 2-3 days a month, all these ovens are humming. And we're making jam with the fruits of our garden, which are the fruits of the kitchen garden. And so these kitchens were used roughly from the 15th century until the Second World War. And then, following this, we made a kitchen upstairs, much more functional and closer to the dining room. But everything is in working order. We restored these basements in the 90s. And since then, we've been using them, showing them. They're rooms that continue to live. It's extraordinary because we found all the brassware, we found all the utensils, everything was there. It was a bit like Sleeping Beauty. Now we're going to head back upstairs, and maybe I'll take you into rooms that usually nobody can see. I'll tell you right away that there is a way to visit them. I organize a few visits per year myself on request, because we can't take everyone, mostly because of the access problem. The problem is the number of steps that can be hard to achieve and so on. I'm going to show them to you anyway. I'm going to open a few doors just for you. So after the caves where we were in the second basement, here we are on the 3rd floor, and this was the main linen room. You have to bear in mind that there were 5 laundries in this chateau. This was the largest, taking up the space of an entire tower, which had been completely painted, refurnished, and restored. They've made something very beautiful. And there was also some large tables for ironing large sheets and tablecloths. In the cupboards, I found a tablecloth that was 17 meters long. So when you need to iron a 17-meter tablecloth, you need big tables. It's quite interesting because we've even got some kidney-shaped tables, because this type of table shape allows people to have the iron to go farther to the center. And the stove, of course, which was in the middle of the room, heated the irons and also was heating this huge room. There was a second stove in the fireplace, which has now disappeared. But I find this room really interesting for its layout and woodwork. It was all done with great care. It's a linen room that was installed in the 19th century, but it's really a beautiful work. And at the back there, you see there's a large cistern, another ingenious 19th century system. You should know that a garden architect by the name of Edouard André worked here and completely redesigned all the gardens for the Marquise de Talouette. And here we are in the 1820s, more or less. Edouard André is the man who also designed the Butte Chaumont, for example, in Paris. He also designed parks in England. He worked a lot with Alphonse and did a lot of private gardens, including those at Le Lude. He redid everything. But at the same time, Mr. André was a great engineer, so he also installed the garden's entire irrigation system. In other words, they built a small mound. He built a 35-meter high water tower on a mound higher than the castle. And from there, the water that was pumped into the Loire, into the river, by a mechanical system called a ram, was sent to the water tower, and from there redistributed to 8 hectares of gardens, plus the chateau. The circuit ended here on the 3rd floor and filled these large cisterns, and then it was redistributed to one or other of the water stations, as they were called. The bathrooms didn't have taps, but there were water stations, and the old kitchens, of course, and so ingenious. So there was a cistern here, and there was another one in the opposite tower. So this is where we keep the old clothes. There's a lot of old clothes. I'm telling you, we didn't throw anything away. So you open a closet and you're going to come across old dresses. And also we can find some embroideries and a lot of uniforms. So some of these clothes belonged to the family and others had another use. For instance, they were used to make plays, because in the old days we used to spend summers here, and one way of keeping ourselves entertained was to put on shows, and we'd do it with all the people in the family or with the neighbors. So there were lots and lots of costumes to play with. So you can imagine the effervescence that must have gone into this kind of place. Everything was done by hand and with a quality of linens that I'll show you in a moment, because we have another laundry to see, where I'll show you the quality of linens used here. Rooms, we've seen the big one in the tower, and this one was the linens room where we did more small linens or dresses, shirts, etc. There are also a few cupboards where the linen was kept. And so these were the trousseaux that ladies got when they got married. And this is the trousseau of the Marquise de Talouet-Roy, who married in 1847, who arrived here with her wardrobe of sheets and towels, all embroidered with the Talouet numerals and Marquis crowns. And in this lingerie too, you could find everything you needed. These are the covers that were put over the furniture when the family went on a trip or when they went to Paris. And if the chateau was not occupied for a certain period of time, all the furniture was covered. Well, all the covers are there, the towels. Well, every time you open a cupboard, you'll find lots of things. The family clothes, as you can see here or over there in that cupboard. And there you have the stove. A stove made especially for irons. That is to say, there's a compartment inside that allows you to put the irons in the hottest place, and with a lid to keep them warm, and it ran on coal. And you can feel that one day someone put the last iron there. And we've tried to restore these rooms and preserve them with all the furniture and everything that was used at the time. Next to the linen room was the staff apartment, and so it was really close by. That was very practical indeed. And those facilities also take up a whole tower. If you look at the floor, you can see that the floor tiles named Tommet were used to cover the floors. And here, this room was a resting place for the ladies, and this is where they also did their sewing, etc. We also have the office where the butlers changed, so here they were able to wash. And there, let me show you something incredible. We found in the cupboards the costumes that they put on for the service of the major ceremonies. In each castle like this, there were those clothes with the arms and colors of the chateau. It's very rare to find this kind of clothes in this very good condition, so we are lucky and happy to show them to the public. And so everything was stored here, and they were coming here to dress up. And I don't know if you noticed it, but the central heating that has been installed at the beginning of the 20th century was able to warm both floors of the staff apartments. Here we are in the games room dedicated to the staff, with here a beautiful billiard table. There was one for the master of the house on the ground floor, and another one here on the second floor for the staff. And so it's here that, in fact, when we restored these rooms, it's here that we collected all the old toys we could find in the house, in the attics or in the old cupboards. And when you open a cupboard, you come across children's old toys. These toys that have entertained generations and never left this house. It's very incredible. And through these apartments, you could access the roof of the chateau and to the patrol paths. Which, of course, are spaces that weren't used but have been preserved almost for aesthetic purposes, for documentary purposes. Here's how patrol paths were built in the Middle Ages with loopholes and machicolations, so you can see a little of the architecture of this period. And I'm going to show you the architecture of the tower. The stair tower and also the dome of the stair tower. This is also, I'd say, that's also one of the rooms we rarely show because access is a bit difficult. But I'll take you there. And here we are right under the roof. And you can see the ingenuity of the builders of the time. Yeah. The ingenuity of the builders of the period, because it's a 19th century frame, and this room includes the top of the cupola of the grand staircase, which was a brick construction with a glazed opening in the middle, but which doesn't open onto the open sky, since there's still a floor above and a small skylight. From here you can clearly see the artifice used to obtain light. That is so smart, so ingenious. Look at this white ceiling overlooking the skylight. And here again a cistern. So this is the other cistern of the chateau connected to the water tower in the park, the Edouard André water tower, which provided running water in this part of the house. So for all the water points. We saw one in the linen room. There's one like that. There's one on each floor. And that meant you could have water even if it wasn't drinkable. It meant you could have water on hand every day. We've just seen the Highness's bedroom, and here I'll take you into a series of additional bedrooms, which are small guest rooms that were occupied as early as the 19th century, when the Marquis de Talois entertained a lot of guests during the summer, during the winter period with the chasse à cour, with in fact all the life that this kind of chateau entailed 150 or 200 years ago. Here, this is the children's bedroom, where we can find some beautiful furniture from the past. For instance, this little children's beds that I've used with our own children. We've used these little beds, which are fantastic. And here we are with the linen, the furniture. We found everything in the cupboard or in the attics, and we've put these little rooms back into operation. And last but not least, here we have Monsieur's bedroom, which is also one with its little canopy, the desk, etc. So what was great about these rooms was that they weren't too big. They were easy to heat, especially in winter, and each had its own stove. Of course, you couldn't imagine this kind of chateau without having a beautiful garden. And Le Lude is no exception to the rule. Its location is quite exceptional in that it overlooks a valley, and Le Loire is a tributary of La Loire, and this has enabled the creation of a succession of terraced gardens. These gardens have existed since the 17th century, so we still have traces of them, with the large terrace and a magnificent balustrade that runs for over 200 meters, but also other spaces that have been created over the generations. I'm thinking in particular of the Jardin de l'Éperon, which is the terrace that took the place of the old fortress when the ship owner of the Compagnie des Indes, Joseph de Villars, had half the chateau demolished to the ground as it was in too poor condition, and so he transformed it into a terrace, which became a garden. We recently transformed it, creating new gardens at the end of the 20th century, which enabled us to install a rose garden, a labyrinth, a whole pathway of yew trees, and also to provide some surprises to discover the extent of the gardens on the banks of the Loire. There's a great carpet of gardens that was once a French garden, a garden created by Édouard André, whom I've already mentioned. Édouard André was the famous landscape architect of the Napoleon III era, who worked for a long time with Alphonse, and so Édouard André completely redesigned the gardens for the Marquise de Talouette and created these formal gardens on the banks of the Loire. We transformed them some 20 years ago and turned them into a garden of ponds and molehills, which is also very structured, very simple but very structured, and which provides a contrast with its opposite, the Loire Valley landscape, which is a constructed landscape, meaning that in the early 19th century, an agricultural park was laid out and planted. The agricultural park is a garden style that was very much in vogue in the first half of the 19th century. The best-known landscape architect to use this style was the Comte de Chaulieu. The agricultural park at Le Lude is somewhat in this style. It's one of the most important elements. To my opinion, it's one of the most important elements of the garden because it's a vast space but planted with majestic clusters of trees that give an extraordinary perspective. It could be an English landscape, but the difference with English parks is that the farm park is not open for walking, not open to the public. It was created for a utilitarian purpose. It's used for agricultural and livestock purposes, but also as an aesthetic complement to the garden and surroundings of a home. This walk also takes you through the park, which has been completely redesigned and planted with clusters of interesting trees. We extended this reflection by doing a whole botanical walk with the help of a botanist who is a botanist from the Sarre area called Jackie Pousse, and we put together a small botanical collection, especially trees and shrubs, which is a young botanical trail, including the oldest plantations are now almost 20 years old. Recently created around the stables, which is also a very amusing route for children to take on a stroll. And basically all these spaces have been rethought, recreated, rehabilitated without betraying the spirit, I think, the spirit of these gardens, the genius of the place, which has been present in the Lude's gardens since the 17th century. So I've shown you the beautiful rooms of the chateau, the ceremonial rooms, the bedrooms, the cellars, the kitchens, and so on. Now we're going behind the scenes to give you quick note and let you know that the work is never finished and that we're currently restoring again 2 new rooms. Well, those are very old rooms in need of a serious facelift, which we'll be adding to the tour. This completes the picture of what a visit to a chateau like this can achieve, and tells yet another part of the story of daily life at Château du Lude. I hope you've enjoyed this visit and that it's inspired you to take a closer look, and perhaps also inspired you to push open the doors and to meet us and discover a little more about what I've shown you. And then perhaps in the future also about the new rooms that will be soon to be open to the public,